What's up, everybody? It's Peaceful here. It's been a while. I've been had some other stuff going on in my life, a little bit of personal issues, some stuff kind of holding me back, but also just a little bit of slowdown for me because of my relationship with Marvel Snap, which is the game I was making videos for, and that's actually what the topic of today's video is going to be. Before we get started, just to let you know, I am doing a giveaway for the new season pass, so make sure you watch to the end. I'll be posing some of some ideas, and let me know in the comments what you think. My favorite answer will win a season pass for the new Deadpool season. So make sure you watch to the end, and let's go ahead and get into it. So, the main point of this video is going to be talking about some of the issues that I see arising with Marvel Snap. A while back, I posed a question to my Twitter following to basically just ask, hey, if you're playing less Snap right now, why is that? And what are your problems you see or you have with the game? And then also, what would bring you back? What would fix that for you? What would make you excited to play Marvel Snap again? So, without further ado, I got over 100 responses and about 50. So, and let me clarify real quick. I didn't put a limit on how many issues someone could give. So, a lot of people gave more than one problem that they had with the game. So, you'll see that the numbers don't quite add up here. That is why, somebody could say they didn't like card acquisition, and they could also say they were tired of the lack of modes and variety, etc. But let's go ahead and break it down. Over 50% of the respondents said they had an issue with the card acquisition system. I think this is a pretty common complaint. A lot of you are probably feeling the same way. The basic sentiment was, hey, it's really hard to get all the cards. We want to play with the new cards, and we can't get all the cards without spending a ton of money, which we're going to touch on in another one of the common complaints we had. The second thing that came up a lot was a lack of game modes and variety. Really, you just have ladder or conquest. Conquest takes forever to queue. They either get tired of ladder or conquest and they don't want to play anymore because they just don't have a mode that they're enjoying at the moment. So this was another very common complaint. 42% of people said lack of game modes and variety. 29% said game economy and monetization. I did separate this from card acquisition because there was people who were talking more about the bundles and how everything is priced and how expensive it can be to get what you need to get the cards. So the overall game economy had a lot of people very frustrated as well, and that was at 29%. At 24%, we had metagame issues, and 11% we had balance issues. I separated them when I was running my numbers, but they kind of to me are very much a similar issue. A lot of times, metagame issues are tied to the balance around the cards in the metagame. So if you put those, together, that's about 35% of people had an issue with the balance and the metagame as it is currently. And the last one that came up quite a bit was at 10% performance issues. And a lot of these people seem to be on mobile. I didn't see a lot of people complaining about the PC client, but I personally have had a lot of issues with the PC client as of late. A lot of buggy interactions, a lot of getting stuck on certain screens, not queuing properly, getting stuck in games. Uh, Everyone's favorite, the collection track bug, where you upgrade a card and then that horrible sound just emanates for the entire time you're there until you exit out and go back in. There's just a lot of little things right now causing performance issues, and a lot of players were very frustrated with that. So I wanted to kind of break it down a little bit further from there. Card acquisition, this is the big one to me, and this is the biggest problem I think I see for the future of Marvel Snap, and this is something I think they actively really need to fix, and that is card acquisition. Players want new cards. Players want to play with new cards, and they don't like it when they can't get them, and that's a pretty fair sentiment, to be honest. I personally, since they went to the extra card a month, where they release a card the same week as the season pass card, I have stopped with the full collection. Part of the reason I've stopped doing videos is I felt like it was hard to, really comment on cards and talk about cards that I wasn't myself picking up. So I think this is a huge issue for the game. I really do. It's frustrating as a new player. Maybe the card isn't great. Maybe the card isn't necessary for every deck. And I know Second Dinner has this weird rule that I think a lot of us think is very weird, that they don't want every player to have every card. They like people having incomplete collections, which I think is a really bizarre uh, way to look at it. Like, why would you not want your players to have the cards to play with? But, that doesn't mean that when you're playing Marvel Snap and you see your opponent drop down this brand new card that you can't yourself get because you can't afford to get it with the resources you have in game, it's a pretty feel bad moment. And it also contributes to some of the following points where people were talking about lack of game modes and variety and lack of things to do. If you can't get every card, you're going to get bored of the game because you can't try new things. You can't try new decks. You're stuck with the same decks. We had people commenting on how they basically have to play discard or destroy because that's the only decks they have complete. They can't play all these new decks that people are putting together with all the new cards. So to me, it's not a coincidence that this is the most common complaint. This is something that people want, and it causes a lot of frustration for them that they can't get it. So next up, we have lack of game modes and variety. There's not enough variety to keep players engaged, and I touched on this a little bit just a second ago, but this is really simple to me. We need more. We need more game modes. You look at something like Hearthstone. You've got the base Hearthstone game. You've got Wild as a different mode. You got Twist. These are all different traditional modes, so those tie just directly into what you would call in Marvel Snap the ladder, but they're different ways to play it. On top of that, you also have Battlegrounds, which is a completely different mode, plays completely differently from the main game while still having the same UI and a lot of the same interactions and stuff that the main mode has. So you have that you can play. And you also just have things like Arena and a bunch of different single player content that they've done over the years. And not all the modes are equal. Not all the modes are great. But if you want to load up and boot up and play Hearthstone, you have a ton of different ways to do so. Same thing with something like Magic the Gathering. You get on Arena, you can play, any of there's like 4 or 5 different like regular card modes that you can play with your constructed decks that you've made with your card collection. But then there's also just a bunch of different draft modes and some single player content as well. There's just a lot of different ways to play the game. And to a certain extent, I think this is an intrinsically broken part of Snap in that because the game is so simple and because the games are so short, you play more of them, which means you do the same things over and over and you get more tired. Like you can play, I don't know, 20 games of Marvel Snap in the times it would take to play 2 or 3 in Hearthstone or 2 or 3 in Magic. And that in itself is a problem because it makes the game get stale faster. So I think the fact that Marvel Snap both has quicker games and has less ways to play it is a huge problem going forward. And it's something I know that they are currently working towards, but that definitely needs addressed. Next up, game economy. Again, like you could argue that maybe this should have been tied into the card acquisition thing, but enough people complained about them separately that I felt like it was only fair to put them separately. Players view the game economy as greedy and bundles as overpriced. This is something that I think we've been hearing for a while now with Snap, that the game economy is just a little bit overpriced. And I tend to agree. And I'll get into things that maybe I would change a little bit. But this is the one area where it's hard for me to get too upset with Second Dinner because, the game is free to play. And if you look at the model of other free to play games, they all follow a very similar model to Marvel Snap in that if you're going to make a game free to play at its base level, you need to make your money somehow. So, there's people who work for Second Dinner who need to make, a living, who need to go home and feed their families. And, I'm not saying that it needs to be as expensive as it is. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do understand the struggle as a smaller game development company and balancing this and making sure that you are making enough money to provide for the people who work for you while at the same time offering value to your consumers. So I kind of see both sides of the fence here on this one. I do agree that a lot of the bundles end up coming out overpriced, but we're going to kind of get into my thoughts on that when we get to the solution section of the video. Metagame and balance issues was the next thing that was brought up by a lot of players. That they feel the meta gets stale quickly. They feel like cards that come out are stronger than they should be in order to encourage people to get them, and then sometimes too quickly get nerfed and stuff like that. Or cards come out, they're too weak, and then people pass on them, and then they get buffed very shortly later. And suddenly there's a card you missed in the Spotlight cache that now is harder for you to get, but it now is an important part of several major meta decks. So kind of a twofold issue here where people get tired of the meta, but also at the same time get tired of the way cards are balanced into the new meta. And I 100% agree with the first issue that I think the metagame in Marvel Snap, because the games are so short and people can play them so quickly, the metagame gets solved faster than any other card game I've ever played. So it tends to be, just a few days into a new card releasing or a couple new cards releasing like at the beginning of a season, and you're already starting to see what decks are the best because not that much changes. It's a very small injection every week, and it doesn't take long for people to figure out A, is this card good? B, what decks does it go best into? And then from that point on, it's just about fine tuning those decks to be the best they can be. And I think the metagame gets very stale for me personally. For a good example is the current metagame with Erisham being a very popular card and suddenly Darkhawks. And you see like people running Surfer decks where they just run Darkhawk because they already have Mystique anyway. And they're copying Darkhawk with Mystique. And that's their whole game plan because they know they're going to, 50% of the time or 30% of the time, they're going to run into Erisham. And the metagame becomes solved and warped around these very powerful cards. Somewhere down the line, we're probably going to see a nerf to Erisham, and then suddenly those decks are going to fall back, and it's just this circular thing. And again, I thought Erisham was super fun when he first came out. I played a ton of games with him. Now all the Erisham mirrors feel like coin flips. They feel like playing a slot machine. The meta has gotten very stale, and it's this cycle all over again. There's a couple days of excitement, and then for the next 5, 6, 7 days while the meta game has settled, the game can get very, very stale. The last one is performance issues, and this one is hard for me to critique too much when it comes to the mobile because let's just face it, not everybody has the same phone. So it's hard for me to say I've never had serious issues on my phone before, but I do know a lot of people do have issues running the mobile app. So um, this is something that you run into a lot. Please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. But personally, I haven't had a lot of issues on mobile. However, on PC, there have been a ton of bugs, a ton of issues, a ton of visual glitches, a ton of audio glitches, and it can be kind of irritating. I'm not gonna lie. When they're pumping out new cards, pumping out new bundles, pumping out all this stuff, and yet the same basic issues in the game still haven't been fixed. There's some bugs that have been around for months, and this does cause some frustration with the player base. And while this isn't something that would stop me from playing the game personally, it is something that bothers me, and I understand people getting frustrated with it. So those are the main issues we had, and I'm not the type of person, I don't want to be all negative. The whole point of this, me asking that question on Twitter, wasn't to create a bunch of discourse and make people complain. The reason I did this is the second question you saw in my tweet of, what would you do? What would bring you back? How do we fix this? How do we make the game better? So I kind of wanted to go through my thoughts personally, both that are formed from some of what people suggested and also just from my own personal thoughts. Disclaimer, obviously, I'm not a dev. I don't know what the numbers are behind the scenes. I don't know a lot of the information I would need to give a perfect answer, but I do feel like I understand enough about game design and game balance that I can offer my thoughts, and you can take it from there. So let's go ahead and get into a little bit. As far as card acquisition, this one's pretty simple to me. There's a couple things that are going to go into my personal idea for this. Is one, I think the Spotlight Cash system's smart. It encourages people to spend. It encourages people to use their resources and to go through the collection track. Which, if you know anything about what the economy was like before they did Spotlight Cashes, it was a lot of people hoarding stuff. But the problem is now for a lot of the higher level people, that same issue has arisen, and for a lot of lower level people, they just don't have enough caches to keep up. So my recommendations are for lower level players, for your average player, we should give them more agency with their Spotlight caches. Um, you know, Instead of it being a random one, you pick what of the four you want. Make the random series 4 and 5 card a guaranteed hit instead of being random, so that you can, guarantee not what the card is, but that you will get a card that you are missing. Would feel a lot better than what people go through right now. Now that said, when you give it more agency, the Spotlight caches become a ton more valuable. They're going to be a lot better than they were before. So they would need to be a little bit rarer for this to work, just as far as a game economy model goes. Remember, this is a game that is technically free to play. You don't have to spend money. And Second Dinner needs to make sure that this is balanced out to where they can still monetize some of the card acquisition in order to be successful for them, in order the game to continue existing. Everything can't be free. That's not the way this works. So yes, this would mean that Spotlight caches need to be slightly rarer, but if they were rarer, but every time you got one, you knew you could get a card you needed, that would be a huge improvement to this system. And there's a lot of things I like about it. So I would personally, I don't think it needs completely changed. And that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to emphasize is, the Spotlight Cache is a good idea. It's just the way it's implemented. The feels bad of getting to a week where you really want all of the cards, but you only have 2 keys, or maybe you get to caches, you only need 1 card, you only want 1 card out of it, but you end up having to spend 4 caches to get it. Like, these are all things that feel really bad. And if they were rarer, but with a lot more agency, I think people would enjoy the system a lot more. As far as the lack of game modes, I think this has mostly been addressed by Second Dinner themselves. They are working on more game modes. They are working on getting some new things out. Even this month, we have Deadpool's Diner, which is going to add a little bit of variety to Ladder. Excited to try that out and see how that goes. And I think that as long as these things come out in a relatively decent time frame, this is something that is going to definitely help the game long term. But the thing I think would definitely be the most helpful, and for anyone who's played Magic or Hearthstone and knows about Arena, uh, draft mode, like Magic, I think Magic the Gathering has really seen most of its success in its digital form because of draft modes, because they give so much replayability. I think a draft mode for Marvel Snap would be an insanely huge boon to the game and would make for a lot of replayability, a lot of fun, and honestly, a lot healthier gameplay for a lot of people. If you can draft a deck and play with some of the cards you don't normally get to play with because you don't own them, it's a way to try them out to know if you even want them. B, you find synergies and stuff that maybe you wouldn't have noticed before. It's a good way to teach players and to help players learn about interactions and stuff. And it's just a super fun game mode. It's a little bit lower power level. I've had a ton of people talk about how the early metagame, the early player experience for the first few days you play Marvel Snap is one of the best they've ever had. But as you get to the higher levels, it gets worse and worse. And honestly, draft mode would capture a lot of that. You're going to be playing with a lot of the chaff, a lot of the cards you get early. Those are going to be the most common ones you see in draft. And that means, that a lot of your decks are going to be built out of things like a baseline Cyclops and a Quicksilver and all this stuff that you played with when you were starting out to guarantee, your 1-drop because you needed to have a 1-drop to play. And just, it would make for a really varied gameplay experience. So more stuff like Deadpool's Diner, a full-on draft mode. These all things that are going to make a huge difference in the replayability of Marvel Snap. So let's talk for a few minutes about the game economy. It's not as simple as make bundles cheaper, right? That's just not how this is going to work. Let's be real. Second Dinner is a game company. The game is free to play. They need bundles that sell for a certain price tag, so that they can make money, so that they can be a profitable company. It's not fair to sit here and be like, well, why is everything so expensive? There are reasons. Are some of them overpriced? I do think so. I feel like they are a little bit they do tend to land on the greedy side when it comes to the pricing on their bundles. However, it's not as simple as, oh, we'll just make bundles cheaper, right? Say, for example, there's a $50 bundle that comes out. You're like, well, if they just made it $10, they sell way more of them. Yes, but if they take it from $50 to $10, are they going to sell 5 times more of that bundle? We don't know that. They've done a ton of pricing experimentation. We've seen $5 bundles, $20 bundles, $15 bundles, $100 bundles. We've seen anything in between there. And we just don't have the data to know how that has actually worked out for them. Like, have they made more money off those smaller bundles? I would venture to say no, because if they were making more money off those bundles, we'd see more of them, right? Like, you got to think about it as a for-profit company. They want to do what makes them the most money. So if the $10, $15 bundles are the most profitable ones, they'd sell more of them, right? But they don't. So obviously the bigger bundles are making them money. What I do like that they've started the trend a little bit more towards in the last couple months, and what I would personally like to see them focus even more on, is making these bundles mostly aesthetic, mostly things that you don't need in order to play the game. For a while there, we were seeing like the Darkhawk bundle and the Mobius bundle right after it was in the Spotlight caches, where it was basically a super expensive bundle, but with a card that maybe players didn't have because it had just been in the Spotlight caches. And that to me is I really don't like the way they were monetizing, because it feels like they're trying to get people to spend money to get the card. Whereas when they do bundles like for like Deadpool or Carnage, or cards that you get very early in the game, that feels a little less offensive to me, because that's something I don't need at all. I love when they do like I would love to see more bundles based around the emotes and stuff like that, because that's stuff you just don't need to play the game. They're just there to look pretty, to be fun. and they don't change the way the game plays at all. So that is the only thing I would like to see, is a little bit more of a focus on that. However, again, they are, a free to play game that needs to make money somehow. So when you see Spotlight Cash keys and stuff in bundles, that's to be expected, and they should be doing that in order to make their money. And if you don't want to spend the money on those, then don't. But I think this one, of all the major complaints that I saw, was the one that I had the hardest time. Like, I do feel like the game has gotten too expensive. I've stopped buying every bundle. I've started spending a lot less money. But I think that's just honestly an individual problem. That's something you need to decide on your own. If you don't have the money to spend to get all the stuff in the game, then don't. It is that simple for me. It wasn't like, oh, I hate them for doing this. It was more just like, it's gotten too expensive. These bundles are overpriced for what they give you. I don't want to spend the money on them, so I didn't. And it wasn't anything against Second Dinner, but I think that we just have to accept that they are making enough money off of these to be worth it. And those of us who don't want to spend the money, just shouldn't spend the money. Speak with your wallet. I think this is something over time, if people are spending the way they should in the game, and spending wisely instead of spending money on stuff maybe you shouldn't be spending it on, that eventually this will even out, because they're going to put bundles out that people actually are buying. Next up, we wanted to talk for a few minutes about metagame balance. This is something that is the main reason, other than lack of game modes and variety, that has really driven me away from playing as much Marvel Snap. For those of you who watch regularly on my Twitch stream, you know that a lot of times it's 1 hour of Marvel Snap, 2 hours of Marvel Snap, then I switch to something else. The game has just gotten very stale between metagame and just lack of game modes, and the metagame balance is actually the main one for me that really, really bothers me. It feels like more and more cards are being concentrated to be generically powerful instead of synergistically powerful, meaning that something like a Red Guardian that is just 99% of the time, you're going to find a use for it that is very good. You're going to kill an Iron Man, you're going to kill a Angela, you're going to kill a Hope Summers, something that completely nerfs their game plan and comes at a very low cost of playing basically what amounts to a 3/5, which is the very generic stat line. That is a generically powerful card. It can go in just about any deck and be very good. Whereas we used to get cards that were very much more focused on certain decks, something like a discard synergy card like X-23. That's a card you can't just, it's not going to go in every deck because it has very specific destroy and discard synergies. And it's still a very good card. It's something that people who love that type of deck can pick up, but you don't need it if those aren't decks that you are going to play. So that for me is the main issue that I see with the current metagame imbalance, is that cards are releasing too generically powerful. They go into too many decks. People are just playing them because on rate, they're just too good not to play. And honestly, this has started to kind of even itself out. In my opinion, the last couple months have been a little bit better as far as that. There's been less Red Hulks and Red Guardians and stuff like that, and more just cards that, need a specific deck, like Hydra Bob, which maybe not the best example because Hydra Bob's pretty bad, but these those types of cards are more what I would like to see. And I would think this will help a lot with metagame imbalance if cards released more as synergy pieces for certain decks, instead of every card coming out being something that everyone needs in order to play the generic good cards deck. And that would help a ton with both metagame diversity and with balance. Less cards coming out that need nerfed within the first couple weeks would mean that people are able to, pick the cards they want to get. So I actually think this could, in a way, help with every part of the issues that we've talked about, other than game economy. This will help with lack of game modes and variety. It would help with card acquisition, because if you don't need to pick up every card because hey, I don't care about Hydra Bob, he's a move card, then it becomes a lot easier to build your collection around the things that you actually want to do. Whereas when every card is like a Red Guardian or a Red Hulk and it's just the best thing you can be doing at that cost, it gets a little bit harder to justify passing on that card. So I think this would actually help a lot with the current issues people have with a lot of the different issues here. And that's everything I've got for today. Let me know in the comments what you think of my game changes and what you would do instead. My favorite answer for what you would change in order to improve the game will win one of my Deadpool season passes. So make sure you do that below in the comments. And thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.